Ciao, and welcome back to Vox Terra. You know, you'll often hear me on my show say, this climate change related, this environmental related story should be screaming headline news, but it ain't, due to the power and the influence of the fossil fuel industry. Well, that's tactic one, is just a kind of underreporter backpage stories. But tactic two, some media outlets like to actively repeat denial industry talking points. By denial industry, we mean all the buckets of money going towards spreading information, disinformation, that this particular product we have for sale, be it fossil fuels, be it tobacco, whatever, pesticides, isn't really so bad for you. So to illustrate that and both show how the climate mechanisms work, I'm going to compare and contrast these recent raging historic floods that Australia just went through back in March, I believe, especially in the New South Wales region, with the raging historic, unprecedented, brutal wildfire season Australia went through practically a year earlier. So in March, New South Wales was inundated with a deluge of rain that flooded hundreds of kilometers. And now these floods were facilitated by the fact that New South Wales had a wetter than average summer. Now these are both climate change indicators. The mechanisms are fairly straightforward, and the media could cite them whenever they cover these extreme weather events, but they don't. In the case of floods, hotter air masses retain more moisture. Hotter oceans give up more. Also, the heating planet is messing with the air and ocean currents, allowing them to get sluggish, and the air masses can just linger longer. So more intense rain for a more prolonged period, or more intense dry for a prolonged period. The ground gets saturated with water and the water has nowhere to go. Citing Professor Steve Sherwood of the Climate Change Research Center at the University of New South Wales. A warmer atmosphere can hold about 7% more moisture for each degree of warming, and the atmosphere is warmer. And Australia's latest State of the Climate report, and remember, the US of A also has a climate assessment report that also gets underreported, but Australia's latest State of the Climate report said indeed there has been an increase in the intensity of heavy rainfall events in Australia. Similar findings of the intensity of heavy rainfall events in the US of A. Now, just a year earlier, Australia had its warmest, driest year on record. Now, in general, this new cycle the Earth's experiencing of heavy rain to dry conditions lends itself to wildfire. The heavy rain spur on to vegetation growth, then everything dries and dries and dries. Then a spark. Then the fire. Now the most common spark is lightning. Lightning is also heat related. So just a year ago, due to this hot, dry condition, Australia experienced wildfires that burned entire towns, killed billions of animals, burning close to 18 million acres. 18 million acres. And it included some of the same areas that are now flooded. So now we can divide media into two spheres if we want to. One so-called liberal, one so-called conservative. But for the most part, these spheres are largely owned by large corporations and business interests and supported and sustained by advertisers. Now the so-called liberal media will cover climate change now, although in the past they really didn't. But they cover it a bit now, but it tends to be backstory and it's not mentioned with each of these extreme events, thus lowering the concern level. Now in the so-called conservative media, they will often just repeat basic denial industry talking points. A classic is the deflection, to take attention away from the fossil fuel industry. Well, you hear very little blame assigned for floods, but wildfire really lends itself to that blame game because it needs that spark. Now, I already told you the most common spark, according to NASA, is lightning. But people can start those fires as well, the arsonist. So the research I did for you, infamous in promoting the deflection technique, would be the Rupert Murdoch-owned Media Empire. Now, the fact Rupert Murdoch is a billionaire who owns a media empire, which includes Fox News, News Corp, The Australian. According to a BBC article I looked at, I believe Murdoch owns around 70% of news publications in major Australian cities. Well, that's a lot of media owned by a wealthy person. And a lot of his media poses as conservative, thus getting a buy-in from average people who maybe sincerely hold conservative values. But he's using it to manipulate them, I believe, by repeating denial industry talking points. Based on some articles I looked at in Vice and other sources, Murdoch-owned publications initially exaggerated the amount of Australian fires attributed to the arsonist, and exaggerated or falsely blamed people trying to protect wild areas as part of the cause of these wildfires, because they're theoretically preventing, forest fire mitigation strategies, that type of thing. But remember, in Australia, a lot of these fires are brush fires. Now, regarding the claim that environmentalists are somehow preventing good forest management, first of all, that's not my experience. As I've said in other videos, I've read a lot of environmentalist literature. For the most part, they advocate sound environmental forestry. According to one of the articles, the Rural Fire Service contradicted claims that environmentalists have been holding up hazard reduction work. Well, regarding the exaggeration, according to the articles what I read, what he did, or what his news publications did, was combine the statistics of arsonists with other, what are called brush fire related offenses, other than arson, including contraventions of fire bans. So I imagine that'd be like, we're at a campsite and we shouldn't be making a fire right now, but we went ahead anyway. And they used annual figures for the entire year, not just for that wildfire period. Additionally, the New South Wales Fire Service, according to the articles that I'll post for you, claimed the major cause of ignition was dry lightning. Now, this exaggerated claim by the Murdoch-owned outlet was then repeated and exaggerated a bit further by Infowars, which is what I consider a false conspiracy website, which creates conspiracies that really serve, in my opinion, to protect those fossil fuel interests. And Donald Trump Jr., and remember, I've done videos before showing you the fossil fuel donations that went to Trump. Now, according to a New York Times article, it's not just Murdoch and then Infowars and Don Trump Jr., but there are bots. There were bots also promoting this false story. Well, who pays for those bots? And then rumors on social media. Well, who starts those rumors? The bots? I'm not sure. These industry think tanks, who starts them? It's hard to pin down. But the rumors also like to assign blame and deflect from fossil fuel interests. One, cited in The Guardian, bizarrely claims bushfires have been lit to clear a path for a high-speed rail down Australia's east coast. Others, the Islamic State. Still others falsely blame Chinese billionaires using lasers to clear a path for new cities. Or falsely claim that eco-terrorists are trying to spur on climate action by manufacturing catastrophe. Well, that fake theme goes way back. And think about in the U.S. with the California wildfires. Fox News, I believe, gave a lot of attention to that an illegal alien or an illegal immigrant was supposedly, or maybe was, I'm not sure, involved in one of the arsons or one of the fires that's spurred on some of the raging California wildfires. But keep in mind, arson or not, it requires dry conditions. Keep in mind, these wildfire increases have been worldwide, even where there's no humans present. So in the US, we saw blame for illegal immigrants, Antifa. Australia, we're seeing eco-terrorists, that type of thing. It's always aimed at just singling out some group, getting the public angry at them to take attention away from business as usual. And when you encounter these type of arguments again come next fire season, remember, no one's even bothering to blame Antifa or illegal immigrants or whoever for the coral reef bleaching, the acidification of the oceans, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet. And generally, no one bothers to blame individual bad actors for the floods. However, one interesting story I'll share with you before we go today. I was at a hotel once, making some conversation with a hotel worker who was from, I believe it was Bangladesh. Bangladesh also experiencing climate-related floods. I brought this up to him thinking we would have some solidarity. Instead, he said it was India. It was India manipulating the dams or the dikes to flood Bangladesh. So you see, these deflection strategies are worldwide. Well, hey, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, click that notification bell, like, comment. And until next time, peace be with you.